14. And then I actually got involved in, I made a new film about a man named Claude Shannon. And Claude Shannon is this unbelievably unknown genius who essentially laid the foundation for the information age. And he is somebody who, he really is the person that first realized what the significance of bits, and that everything could be converted to zeros and ones. I mean, he was somebody, he was looking for a universal theory of communication. So this was in the 40s, late 30s, 40s, and we had all these different things like I mean, we're on radio and TV and text and all sorts of things that you wanted to communicate. And what Shannon realized is fundamentally, what is it? It's about communicating information. You're transmitting information. And nobody had really, there was no real theory of information. I mean, I think information was considered to be this, sort of abstract thing. Probably people thought, well, information is about data and amount of info. How would you measure information? Well, it's like the amount of text on a page or something like that. And what Shannon realizes that information is fundamentally, it's about the resolution of uncertainty. So it's something you didn't know, and now you know. That's the basic unit of information, is you find out something that you didn't know, and now you know. And that he realized that it basically could all be reduced to this simple binary thing of, not know or no, or true or false, yes, no, 0 or 1, a bit. And so he realized that, you could, if you changed all information, if you reduced it, if you changed it all into, basically this question of a 0 or a 1, you could have a universal theory. I mean, this would apply to any information, whether it's, text or pictures or sound or things like that. It's all the same then. It's all zeros or ones. And you could come up with a mathematical theory. And he showed how you could measure it. You could measure information mathematically. And then you could optimize it. You could talk about compressing it, because he realized that a lot of things are redundant. And so he looked, initially at that, like the English language, where we know that, if the whole notion that, I mean, if you have a Q, the U is going to generally follow. And there's a lot of other things that we have incorporated in our grammar and patterns. And he, looked at it in a more general sense, realized that, there's a lot of redundancy you don't need, so you could compress information, and that you could transmit it, and that you could actually come up with a theory of how to overcome errors in transmission of information. And that, if you had a good theory and an understanding of what you have, you could essentially code it in certain ways that could compensate for errors. And, the earliest, most popular manifestation of this was, when we suddenly had CDs that could compensate for scratches, because, they could overcome scratches, as opposed to an analog LP record. But, digital media could often be encoded in a way that it could compensate for scratches and things like that. And so it was this, comprehensive theory of communication that allowed you essentially to, if you were clever enough, to code things in a way that you could have efficient and perfect communication. And
it seems like such a distant memory of playing a CD in a CD player and having it skip. Remember when you'd bounce it or you'd vibrate it too much, the music would skip?
Yeah.
What was this guy's name again?
Claude Shannon.
Claude Shannon. What led you to discover this guy?
Well, it was actually a friend who is an information theorist who told me about it. He was a friend, and he said he has an idea for me for another film. And he said, it's about Claude Shannon. And I admit I didn't know who Claude Shannon was myself, and then started reading about it. And you start thinking, how could we not know about this person? He, is so fundamental to everything in our modern world. And, in a sense, he did three major things as a grad student, for his master's degree. He actually was the first person in 1938 to realize that you could meld something called Boolean algebra. So Boolean algebra was a mathematics of thought. I mean, it's basically, you see these sort of logical arguments that, so-and-so does this, so-and-so does this, then this does this. And, it's sort of the logical statements that can lead to a conclusion, that children don't like alligators, alligators eat children. You could do this sort of series of things. And they were all just, it was basically logical statements. And he showed how you could make those mathematical. And they were all, just being about true or false. That statements were either true or false, and you could make logical arguments. And, it was the basis of, how we think that this is a logical argument. And what Shannon realized is that basic, true-false aspect could be mapped to electric circuits, which are either on or off. And so the on, a circuit is either on or off, and then that could correspond to true or false. And he showed that basically any logical argument, you could have an electric circuit to mimic it. So you could basically make circuits that could do logic. And so in a sense, it's the basis of the idea of a modern computer that does something more than just, adds numbers or things like, or makes steam.
Like
so,
something that's true or false?
Yeah, so true or false could correspond to just, whether a circuit is on or off, whether a switch is connected or not. And so, the basis of this idea of a computer that, really could do logical operations, comes from this. And this was his master's thesis. Then during the war, he was working, he was at Bell Labs, and he was working on cryptography. And he wasn't that interested in, specifics of code breaking. So, a lot of the effort during the war was, how do we break a code? This was like the Enigma with Alan Turing and things like that. But Shannon was really interested in a much more theoretical, fundamental question is like, what is a code? And how much information do you need to break a code? Can you make a code that's completely unbreakable? And so he wrote a paper that basically people consider as the foundation of theoretical cryptography. And then he really he came up with this theory of information theory. And it was really, he was working on it on and off for 10 years and didn't really talk to anybody about it. It was just something, nobody else even was thinking that there was a theory of information, mathematical theory of communication like this. And he sort of wrote a paper in 1948, 2 big papers that just sort of created this field and threw down a challenge basically, because he predicted that if you could find the right way to code things into zeros and ones, if you could find the right way to code things in zeros and ones, and then to compensate for errors, that you could have perfect communication. And he, threw this down in his paper in 48, and it took until the 90s to basically be able to prove everything. And people began to use it right away. And it was very important for like the Voyager, for our satellites, the reason we can actually communicate over these huge distances, because, they were applying principles that Shannon had laid down in terms of how you could compress the signals, how you could compensate for the noise of, millions of miles of travel. And it was used in, obviously compression is something that is critical to our way of life. I mean, the whole idea, the way we compress images, the idea, the ability to be able to, for us to talk on Zoom and see images, yet it all comes down to basic principles still of what Shannon laid down of how to encode information, how to transmit it.